They found me knowing that they needed a ghostwriter and then got on my email list. I get an inquiry 7 days after she signs on for the newsletter, and then from there, they're winning all the things, all the bells and whistles, like a really large client project amount, but then also the retainer.
Most service-based businesses are driven by referrals. Like literally all of their business is driven by people they know recommending business to them. Kendall Cherry and Candid Collective are completely different. Kendall is actually anti-referral. Now, I'll explain why Kendall is anti-referrals later in this video, but the more important thing to know is that Kendall has now built a ghostwriting business called Candid Collective that pulls in at least $20,000 per month in revenue. It took a few years to get there and a little bit of a wild ride. So let's dive into how Kendall started Candid Collective, why she's anti-referral, and the tactics she used to build Candid Collective with a tiny little newsletter. Let's set the stage and talk a little bit about how Kendall started her career before we get into Candid Collective specifically. Now, Kendall started her career being a ghostwriter for a senior executive at a Fortune 100 company. She would write some of the internal communications, she would write some of the external communications, and it seemed to be a decently good time. Every about 18 months, Kendall would get promoted, and she would write a lot of different types of content for this senior executive. And that seemed to be going really well. However, after about 5 years of being there, she realized she didn't want to be a lifer at this Fortune 100 company. And also, she wanted to be writing a more variety of content. She just wanted to be writing for one particular business. So after 5 years, she ended up making the decision to leave this Fortune 100 company and start her own business that would coach people how to write their own content. But one big problem though, Kendall is more of an introvert. And if you're used to being on Zoom all the time, you know, especially as an introvert, being on Zoom all the time isn't really a great use of energy, and that can be incredibly draining. And for Kendall, that being on Zoom and be meeting with people all the stinking time was incredibly draining. So she ends up shutting down this particular business just because of how much of a drain that particular business was, coaching others how to write their own content. So Kendall shuts down this coaching business and ends up starting a new business where she would be just focused on being a copywriter. And at this time, it was okay to maybe just play around with, starting a new business because she was living with her parents at the time and the expenses are pretty low, but she still needs to pay some bills. But just focus on being a copywriter herself actually does really well. And within her first month of being just a copywriting business rather than a coaching business, she does $10,000 in her first month in business. And this copywriting business and this $10,000 of revenue in that first month ends up keeping going. It's continuing to do well. And as a result, she ends up expanding the business into a more broader agency and just doing digital marketing generally. However, just doing digital marketing generally ended up being the wrong decision because it was way too broad. And as Kendall put it when I was chatting with her, is that she ends up in this mental game of like, okay, where do I actually provide value for people? Because I'm doing copywriting, I'm doing like content strategy, I'm doing this. And it's too much of a mental game of like, what do I actually provide value for? It's this concept of like, what are you actually known for and what do you actually are great at? What's your like superpower skill? And Kendall didn't feel like she knew that, being so broad with digital marketing and just building a broad digital marketing agency. So in May of 2023, she ends up shutting down this business and this agency down in 2023. Kendall shuts down the agency in May of 2023, and then in June of 2023, so the next month, she ends up deciding to become a fractional CMO or a fractional chief marketing officer for small businesses. And there's kind of, I think, two main reasons here. One is that, right, then you kind of clearly know, like, here's my value, here's how I actually help people. And also, right, it's much simpler than just having an agency where you're managing people and all these different projects and things like that. If you're a fractional CMO, right, it's a much simpler business. But then second, being a fractional CMO, right, instead of just, if you're a full-time CMO, right, you'd have a reoccurring revenue, which would be your salary. But by being a fractional CMO, right, you can kind of lift the ceiling of what maybe your salary might be, and you're getting, in theory, reoccurring revenue. But Kendall is only a fractional CMO for 6 months, and there's two main issues here. The first issue, right, is that being a fractional CMO for small businesses in particular is that that's a stretch investment, as Kendall put it, right? Most small businesses don't need this fractional CMO. Maybe if it was a high growth startup or things like that, then yeah, there's an argument that it's actually a good fit. But for most small businesses, being a fractional CMO for them it's a big investment, and it's not necessarily like on the higher priority list for them. And it also hurt, right? In Black Friday of 2023, as Kendall put it, it wasn't as big as a lot of the businesses, especially the businesses she was working with. It wasn't as fruitful as they were all hoping for. So in Black Friday, so November of 2023, she ends up losing 90% of her reoccurring revenue in 1 month. And as Kendall put it, right, it's not really reoccurring revenue if people can't pay you on time and it's too much of a stretch for them. So this concept of, right, of having reoccurring revenue as a fractional CMO and having this simple business for a market that doesn't really have the resources and it's not really a priority for them, well, that's not really a good business to be in. So here we are back at the drawing board all over again. So by December of 2023, Kendall ends up stopping being a fractional CMO for these small businesses. So if you're counting, we're now on pivot number 4 for Candid Collective and Kendall Cherry, but that's okay. Sometimes you have to take a bunch of swings to really hit the home run. And this 4th pivot that Kendall made in January of 2024 seems to be the home run. And this 4th pivot was what Kendall did is actually shift the Candid Collective and just being solely focused on doing ghostwriting for other creators and other businesses. There's a few reasons why this is really working. One is that it's making Candid Collective and Kendall really known for one specific thing. I've talked a little bit about this right already in this deep dive, but also right, it's been a common theme even in other deep dives like the Insight Lime Analytics with Mary Beth and also the one with Demand Maven and Asia Arangio. When you are known for one specific thing, it becomes really easy to market that and also really clear for others to know, like, here's what we're actually offering. And it becomes really specific in like who you're trying to attract and also who you can really help. The second part of that, right, is that it's actually going back to Kendall's superpower, which is writing and being a ghostwriter. She's not trying to do this, digital strategy process or this design or whatever it might be, or this ad strategy. She's going back to her superpower and she's just becoming known for her superpower. That's a really big deal, which also, right, helps with marketing, but also like when you're marketing your superpower, it comes like a little bit naturally to you, but also, right, that means you're going to always deliver because that's what you're really good at. The last reason I think this pivot is really working though is that she's attracting a different type of client. Instead of attracting these small businesses where she's more of a stretch investment if they're paying her, these new clients that she's working with or these clients from 2024 are not stretching their budgets. This isn't a stretch investment for them to hire a ghostwriter. It's more of a necessity, and also they have much larger budgets so they can pay on time, and you're getting more of that reoccurring revenue in reality rather than, hey, I think I have recurring revenue, but it's not really recurring revenue. And because, right, she has a more of a stable client base that it's where it's not a stretch investment, it's actually like a needed investment for to hire a ghostwriter and specifically Candid Collective and Kendall. She's actually been able to build a really successful business that at a minimum is making $20,000 a month in revenue and all the way up to about $35,000 a month in revenue, depending on the projects and kind of Kendall's capacity throughout her entire business. So if you're tracking, if you want to see kind of the revenue kind of curve, it's not this up and to the right and just went from like $0 to $20,000. That is not how this worked with Candid Collective. Really, it went from like $10,000 and it was kind of growing and growing and growing. And then it just like went back down to 0 and then kind of came back up to about $20,000 to $35,000 per month in revenue. It's been, as Kendall put it, just like this really wild ride for all sorts of different reasons. But it's also a really critical reminder that revenue isn't always up and to the right. It's not always a growth curve. You've got to take some time to really figure things out. That's the high-level story of Candid Collective and Kendall Cherry, but let's dive a little bit deeper into the growth strategies and the tactics that Kendall's been using to build Candid Collective into a $250K plus annual revenue business. And one note before I actually dive into these kind of specific growth strategies is that Candid Collective is pretty unique. It's not, as I mentioned in the beginning of this video, it's not a business based on referrals. And most services businesses like Candid Collective are built off referrals. One specific example, if you want to check that out, is Entrepreneurial Technologies, Aaron Rolandhagen, which is on this channel. They've been built mostly off referrals. But Kendall is actually anti-referral based. But instead of me explaining why she's that way, let me actually have Kendall explain why she is anti-referral.
My business never was very referral heavy. It just never worked that way. I started seeing when I would set up these referral, I was going to go reach out to a bunch of people or whatever else. It always felt like my sales were completely out of my control because I was exhausting all these virtual copy calls and I've got all these supposed referral partners and I'd exhausted all this energy building my referral basis that I wasn't actually selling anything. I just remember feeling like, okay, well, I'm going to go message that one person that always has the referrals coming. And I hated how out of control my revenue, my income, my salary felt like because I didn't have a sales lever. I didn't have a way to just pull a lever and say, like, hey, I'm available or I'm open or I have these different offers. I didn't love how dependent on other people I was to make the kind of money that I wanted to make. And I think that was a very alternative approach at that time, but I do think that's probably one of the things that helped me get to 250K in revenue is this idea of like, yes, I can have these things in place, but I'd also want my work and my writing and my services to kind of speak for themselves and kind of on my own timeline or on my own output, not just based on, Sally behind the closed doors mentioned my name. I don't think it's a really savvy long-term business plan either. So I kind of washed it out of mine and it's been serving me really well ever since.
So there's a lot we can unpack there, but I think there's one kind of main takeaway, at least that I took out of that, is that if you're solely relying, or at least primarily relying on referrals to be your main growth strategy, especially with the services-based business, there's kind of two things that have to go right. One is that you have to be top of mind for people in your network. And then two, the people in your network have to be meeting the right people to be sending you people to your business. And that's kind of, there's two things, right, that like you're not in control of. So your growth becomes really sporadic or really just not in your control. And that's not great for building a sustainable and a really just kind of a healthy business. Again, you're not in full control of your own business. So that's why Kendall has built Candid Collective differently. And she's actually built Candid Collectively mainly through her email newsletter. And you might be thinking, okay, an email newsletter, to really build a business around it, it has to be at least 1,000 people, right? Well, Kendall's actually built Candid Collective with a really tiny audience, especially on email. So let me give you just kind of the quick numbers that Kendall's actually shared publicly on LinkedIn. She has 572 subscribers. She has a 49% open rate and a 3% click rate. And if you looked at just those numbers, even if you just do basic math, you're like, there's no way this is a big business, or at least even just a business that even makes like $10,000. Most businesses don't have those like teeny tiny numbers. It's nothing flashy at all. But here's kind of the really clever way that Kendall has built this really tiny audience that's super valuable. And the main way is by having her services guide as the lead magnet. So her services guide, right, that is the guide, the PDF that kind of shows like, here's our pricing, here's what we can offer, here's how we can help your business. And to get that services guide, you have to join the newsletter. So if you have an intent to, be working with Kendall, well, you're going to sign up for the newsletter. You're going to sign up for that services guide. So 40% of her list at 572 people has actually joined by wanting that services guide. So it kind of gets back to quantity versus quality. Kendall just has a really, really high quality of people on her list because the intent of why they're joining her email newsletter is there to help, to work with Kendall. So if you have the right intentions that are for at least the people that you want to have to join your list, if they have the right intentions or at least the reasons you want them to join the list, if those are aligned, it makes having a really tiny email audience really perfect for building a real business. And also, right, by having an email newsletter, one is that it's actually showing each week, like Kendall's like, hey, here's the work I do, right? Because if your business is a writing business and you're writing an email newsletter, well, you're just like proving it out and building a relationship with the people on your list. But also the second part I think is really clever. And I don't think Kendall initially intentionally does this, but she does this through a really transparent process. And she actually shows at the end of every email what her actually capacity is and how many kind of slots she has still open. But instead of me talking about how she's kind of created this unintentional urgency through transparency, let me actually have Kendall explain how she's actually been creating unintentional urgency.
I'll say it's unintentional urgency because I don't love the, like, I'll say shitty, broy sales tactics, scarcity, urgency, all that shit we've all been told. I think it's total bullshit and I hate it and it's so capitalistic. The truth is, it stems from a respect of myself and caring for what I need to operate at my best. I don't do like, "Time's running out. You have 5 seconds to sign on." It's not about that, but I'm very open and I'm forward with, "Hey, I only have these number of spots." It's at the bottom of every email. I'm super open about it. I find communicating it early is helpful for people if they are planning. I don't love making people feel pressured. I don't do last minute, like, flash sales or anything like that for the people that wanna work with me. I think that my ideal client is someone that's willing to wait for really great content and copy. And so when you get to a certain level, people do have that kind of foresight. They're not needing, a piece next week. They're much further planned in advance. Those are definitely the type of people I wanna work with that are a little bit more put together. No Hail Marys over here, no last minute churns, because that is another way to just zap my creative energies. I really respect my craft. I respect the clients that I work with, and I want them to get the best product that they can get. It's more about the quality of the work, I think, more than anything.
So I really love how Kendall's approached this kind of building this unintentional urgency, right? Because again, as she mentioned, right, it's not this like salesy, like you only have 5 seconds to sign up for this. No, it's like, here's what I'm working on. Here's the openings. Like if you want to work with me, if you need our services, like here's the timeline of what I need you to be on. So it helps really, especially, to be planning out maybe what your year is going to look like. If you're just very open with people, especially if you're really, really amazing at what you do, like what Kendall's doing with Candid Collective, right? Their work is really great, so the demand's gonna be higher. And so if you're really transparent with like, hey, here's what our openings are, it kind of creates, again, this unintentional urgency that's not very salesy, but makes people kind of like, ooh, I need to get on this sooner than later. Now, you might be thinking, okay, like it's great that like people are signing up for this newsletter and like signing up through the services guide, but how are people actually finding that services guide? And I would say there's two main ways that people are finding her services guide as their lead magnet. The first one is LinkedIn. In LinkedIn, I think Kendall actually has a really kind of clever strategy of going about it, where it's like a little bit of work, but not like overwhelming me amount of work. What Kendall does, right, is she's creating evergreen content. So content, right, that's not based on trends, or it's not, it's not time sensitive. And by doing that, right, she can be posting on this evergreen content on LinkedIn with, with like it's about, copywriting or about ghostwriting. But also, right, what she ends up doing is that she ends up creating a library of content that she can reuse. And there's kind of two reasons why you can do that. One is that, right, your audience isn't always gonna, see all of your posts, and for the algorithm reasons or whatever, right, might be, right? They're not always gonna see your posts. But two, right, like if you saw the same post, like the chances of you actually remembering, like, hey, that's a duplicative post, like they already posted that, like no one remembers that in your audience. It's very rare, and no one's gonna actually comment and be like, oh, I already saw this. Like no one does that. So what Kendall ends up actually doing, right, is kind of building this library of content. So she's not creating all this new content all the time. She can create a library of content and then kind of post that sporadically, over a 6 or 12 month stretch, which is really clever. Now, this last part of LinkedIn is pretty simple, and that is just being an active community member in LinkedIn. So if you're on LinkedIn, you'll see Kendall just kind of comment, she'll engage with other posts, and just by doing that, that has led to a bunch of sales and clients signing up for her services as well. Kendall mentioned that she actually was, she commented on someone's post, and then actually someone else saw that comment, saw what Kendall was doing, and actually ended up becoming a client for Kendall. So just by being active on LinkedIn, that might lead to other opportunities. Now, the second way people are finding the Candid Collective Services Guide is actually Kendall being a guest on other podcasts, kind of like she's being a guest on this particular YouTube channel. So essentially what happens, right, is that she's a guest on other podcasts, and they're mostly tiny little podcasts. They're not very big at all. But right, just having a tiny audience, even as a podcast, right, those tiny audiences have a lot of trust built into them, especially for podcasts, because they're typically at least 30 minutes. And if you're listening to someone in your earbuds for 30 minutes, that builds a ton of trust. So by Kendall just kind of showing her expertise on these podcasts, one, she's demonstrating her expertise and actually talking through it. But second, she's actually being shared with audiences that are not her own, even if they're these tiny little audiences. And again, right, it's quality, not quantity, especially when it comes to this particular business with Candid Collective. If you're in front of the right target audience, right, you're going to attract the right people. And especially, right, if your lead magnet is your services guide, it built a really strong system, even if it's unintentional by Kendall, of actually attracting clients and attracting the right people to your business. So having thousands of people on your newsletter can be great, but if there's not a sustainable business model behind it, how useful is it? If you're an aspiring creator but don't want to be famous per se, Kendall and Candid Collective are a great example of how to build a thriving business. Now, if you found this video helpful, I would love it if you can give it a like. And if you're looking for more content like this, check out the newsletter in the description below.